meaning whereof they told him was to know if he intended them well or no. The circle of meal signified their country, the circles of corn the bounds of the sea, and the sticks his country. They imagined the world to be flat and round, like a trencher, and they in the midst. After this they brought him a bag of gunpowder, which they carefully preserved till the next spring, to plant as they did their corn, because they would be acquainted with the nature of that seed. Obchapan, the king's brother, invited him to his house, where with as many platters of bread, fowl, and wild beasts as they did in Varan, he bade him welcome, but not any of them would eat a bit with him, but put up all the remainder in baskets. At his return to Opachancanos, all the king's women and their children flocked about him for their parts, as a due by custom, to be merry with such fragments. But his waking mind in hideous dreams did often see wondrous shapes, of bodies strange and huge in growth, and of stupendous necks. At last they brought him to Warowolkomoko, where was Powhatan, their emperor. Here more than 200 of those grim courtiers stood wondering at him, as if he had been a monster, till Powhatan and his train had put themselves in their greatest braveries. Before a fire upon a seat, like a bedstead, he sat covered with a great robe made of dragon skins, and of the tails hanging by. On either hand did sit a young wench of 16 or 18 years, and along on each side of the house 2 rows of men, and behind them as many women, with all their heads and shoulders painted red, many of their heads beaked with the white down of birds, but every one with something, and a great chain of white beads about their necks. At his entrance before the king, all the people gave a great shout. The queen of Appomattox was appointed to bring him water to wash his hands, and another brought him a bunch of feathers, instead of a towel, to dry them. Having feasted him after their best barbarous manner they could, a long consultation was held, but the conclusion was 2 great stones were brought before Powhatan. Then as many as could laid hands on him, dragged him to them, and thereon laid his head, and being ready with their clubs to beat out his brains. Pocahontas, the king's dearest daughter, where no entreaty could prevail, got his head in her arms, and led her on upon his, to save him from death. Were it the emperor was contented, he should live to make him hatchers, and her bells, beads, and copper, for they thought him as well of all occupations as themselves. For the king himself will make his own robes, shoes, bows, arrows, pots, plant, hunt, or do anything so well as the rest. They say he bore a pleasant show, but sure his heart was sad. For who can pleasant be and rest, that lives in fear and dread, and having life suspected, doth it still suspected lead? 2 days after, Powhatan, having disguised himself in the most fearfullest manner he could, caused Captain Smith to be brought forth to a great house in the woods, and there upon a mat by the fire to be left alone. Not long after, from behind a mat that divided the house, was made the most dolefulest noise he ever heard. Then Powhatan, more like a devil than a man, with some 200 more as black as himself, came unto him and told him now they were friends. And presently he should go to Jamestown to send him 2 great guns and a greenstone, for which he would give him the country of Capahawasic and forever esteem him as his son Natahquot. So to Jamestown with 12 guides Powhatan sent him. That night they quartered in the woods, he still expecting, as he had done all his long time of his imprisonment, every hour to be put to one death or other, for all their feasting. But Almighty God, by his divine providence, had mollified the hearts of those stern barbarians with compassion. The next morning betimes, they came to the fort, where Smith, having used the savages with what kindness he could, he showed Rohunt, Powhatan's trusty servant, 2 dummy coverings and a millstone to carry to Powhatan. They found them somewhat too heavy, but when they did see him discharge them, being loaded with stones, among the boughs of a great tree loaded with icicles, the ice and branches came so tumbling down that the poor savages ran away half dead with fear. But at last we regained some conference with them, and gave them such toys, and sent to Powhatan his women and children such presents as gave them in general full content. Now in Jamestown they were all in combustion, the strongest preparing once more to run away with the pinnace, which, with the hazard of his life, with saker falcon and musket shot, Smith forced now the 3rd time to stay or sink. Some, no better than they should be, had plotted with the President the next day to have him put to death by the Levitical law, for the lives of Robinson and Amory, pretending the fault was his that had led them to their ends. But he quickly took such order with such lawyers that he laid them by the heels till he sent some of them prisoners for England. Now every once in 4 or 5 days, Pocahontas with her attendants brought him so much provision that saved many of their lives, that else for all these had starved with hunger. Thus from none death our good God sent relief, the sweet assuager of all other grief, his relation of the plenty he had seen, especially at Werowocomoco, and of the state and bounty of Powhatan, which till that same was unknown, so revived their dead spirits, especially the love of Pocahontas, as all men's fear was abundant. Thus you may see what difficulties still crossed any good endeavor, and the good success of the business being thus often brought to the very period of destruction. Yet you see by what strange means God has still delivered it. From a description of New England. Who can desire moral content that has small means or but only his merit to advance his fortune, than to tread and plant that ground he has purchased by the hazard of his life? If he have but the taste of virtue and magnanimity, what to such a mind can be more pleasant than planting and building a foundation for his posterity, got from the rude earth, by God's blessing and his own industry, without prejudice to any? If he have any grain of faith or zeal in religion, what can he do less hurtful to any, or more agreeable to God, than to seek to convert those poor savages to know Christ, and humanity whose labors with discretion will triple required thy charge and pains. What so truly suits with honor and honesty as the discovering things unknown, erecting tunnels, peopling countries, informing the ignorant, reforming things unjust, teaching virtue, and gaining to our native mother country a kingdom to attend her, finding employment for those they are idle, because they know not what to do, so far from running any, as to cause posterity to remember thee, and remembering thee, ever honor that remembrance with praise? Then who would live at home idly, or think in himself any worth to live, only to eat, drink, and sleep, and so die, or by consuming that carelessly, which his friends got worthily, or by using that miserably, which maintained virtue honestly, or for being descended nobly, pine with the fame found of great kindred, in penury, or to maintain a silly show of bravery, toil out thy heart, soul, and time, vastly by shifts, tricks, cards, and dice, or by relating new of others' actions, shark here or there for a dinner or a supper, deceive thy friends by fair promises and dissimulation, in borrowing where thou never intendest to pay, offend the laws, surfeit with excess, burden the country, abuse thyself, despair in want, and then cozen thy kindred, yea, even thine own brother, and wish thy parents' death. I will not say damnation to have their estates, though thou seest what honors and rewards the world yet has for them will seek them, and worthily deserve them. Let least move you to embrace employment for those whose educations, spirits, and judgments want but your purses, not only to prevent such accustomed dangers, but also to gain more thereby than you have. And you fathers that are either so foolishly found, or so miserably covetous, or so wilfully ignorant, or so negligently careless, as that you will rather maintain your children in idle wantonness, till they grow your masters, or become so vastly unkind, as they wish nothing but your deaths, so that both sorts grow dissolute, and although you will wish them anywhere to escape the gallows, and ease your cares, though they spend you here 1, 2, or 300 pounds a year, you will greedy to give half so much in adventure with them, to obtain an estate, which in a small time, but with a little assistance of your providence, might be better than your own. But if an angel should tell you that any place yet unknown can afford such fortunes, you will not believe him, no more than Columbus was believed there was any such land as is now the well-known abounding America, much less such large regions as are yet unknown, as well in America as in Africa and Asia, and terra incognita, where were curses for gentlemen, and them that would be so reputed, more suiting their qualities than begging from their prince's generous disposition the labors of his subjects and the very marrow of his maintenance. I have not been so ill-bred, but I have tasted of plenty and pleasure, as well as want and misery, nor doth necessity yet, or occasion of discontent, force me to these endeavors, nor am I ignorant what small thank I shall have for my pains, or that many would have the world imagine them to be of great judgment, that can but blemish these my designs, but by their witty objections and detractions. Yet I hope my reasons with my deeds will so prevail with some, that I should not want employment in these affairs, to make the most blind see his own senselessness and incredulity, hoping that gain will make them affect that which religion, charity, and the common good cannot. It were but a poor device in me to deceive myself, much more the king and state, my friends and country, with these inducements, which, seeing his majesty has given permission, I wish all sorts of worthy, honest, industrious spirits would understand, and if they desire any further satisfaction, I would do my best to give it, not to persuade them to go only, but go with them, not leave them there, but live with them there. I will not say, but by ill providing and undue managing such courses may be taken, may make us miserable enough. But if I may have the execution of what I have projected, if they want to eat, let them eat or never digest me. If I perform what I say, I desire but that reward out of the gains may suit my pains, quality, and condition. And if I abuse you with my tongue, take my head for satisfaction, if any dislike at the ear's end, defraying their charge, by my consent they shall freely return. I fear not want a company sufficient, were if but knowing what I know of those countries, and by the proof of that wealth, I hope yearly to return. If God please to bless me from such accidents as are beyond my power in reason to prevent, for I am not so simple to think that ever any other motive than wealth will ever erect there a commonwealth, or draw company from their ease and humours at home, to stay in New England to effect my purposes. At last any should think the toil might be insupportable, though these things may be had by labor and diligence. I assure myself there are those who delight extremely in vain pleasure, that take much more pains in England to enjoy it than I should do here to gain wealth sufficient, and yet I think they should not have had such sweet content, for our pleasure here is still gains in England, charges and laws. Here nature and liberty afford us that freely which in England we want, or it costs us dearly. What pleasure can be more than being tired with any occasion ashore, in planting vines, fruits, or herbs, in contriving their own grounds, to the pleasure of their own minds, their fields, gardens, orchards, buildings, ships, and other works, etc., to recreate themselves before their own doors, in their own boats upon the sea, where man, woman, and child, with a small hook and line, by unclean, may take divers sorts of excellent fish, and their pleasures. And is it not pretty sport to pull up 2 pence, 6 pence, and 12 pence, as fast as you can, haul and veer a line? He is a very bad fisher, who cannot kill in one day, with his hook and line, 100, 200, or 300 cod, which dressed and dried, if they be sold there for 10 shillings the hundred, thought in England they will give more than 20. May not both the servant, the master, and merchant be well content with this gain? If a man work but 3 days in 7, he may get more than he can spend, unless he will be excessive. Now, that carpenter, mason, gardener, tailor, smith, sailor, forgers, or what other, may they not make this a pretty recreation, though they fish, but an hour in a day, to take more than they eat in a week, or if they will not eat it, because there is so much better choice, yet sell it, or change it, with the fishermen, or merchants, for anything they want. And what sport doth yield a more pleasing content, and less hurt or charge than angling with a hook, and crossing the sweet air from isle to isle, over the silent streams of a calm sea, wherein the most curious may find pleasure, profit, and content. Thus, the old men be not fishers, yet old men, whatsoever, may in other matters do as well, for necessity does in these cases so rule a commonwealth, and each in their several functions, as their labors in their qualities may be as profitable, because there is a necessary mutual use of all. For gentlemen, what exercise should more delight them than ranging daily those unknown parts, using fowling and fishing for hunting and hawking? And yet you should see the wild hogs give you some pleasure in seeing them stoop 6 or 7 after one another, an hour or two together, at the schools of fish in the fair harbors, as those ashore at the fowl, and never trouble nor torment yourselves with watching, mewing, feeding, and attending them, nor kill horse and man with running and crying. See you not a hawk? For hunting also, the woods, lakes, and rivers afford not only chase sufficient for any that delights in that kind of toil or pleasure, but such beasts to hunt, that besides the delicacy of their bodies for food, their skins are so rich as may well recompense thy daily labor with a captain's pay. For laborers, if those that snow hemp, rap, turnips, parsnips, carrots, cabbage, and such like, give 20, 30, 40, 50 shillings yearly for an acre of ground, and meat, drink, and wages to use it, and yet grow rich, when better or at least as good ground may be had and cost nothing but labor. It seems strange to me any such should their ground poor. My purpose is not to persuade children to go from their parents, men from their wives, nor servants from their masters only, such as with free consent may be spared, but that each parish or village, in city or country, that will but apparel their fatherless children, or 13 or 14 years of age, or young married people that have small wealth to live on, here by their labor may live exceedingly well, provided always that first there be a sufficient power to command them, houses to receive them, means to defend them, and meet provisions for them. For any place may be overland, and it is most necessary to have a fortress ere these grow to practice, and sufficient masters, as carpenters, or as there is occasion for apprentices, the masters by these may quickly grow rich. These may learn their trades themselves, to do the like to a general and an incredible benefit for king and country, master and servant. William Bradford. William Bradford epitomizes the spirit of determination and self-sacrifice that seems to us characteristic of our first pilgrims, a word Bradford himself was the first to use to describe the community of believers who sailed from Southampton, England, on the Mayflower and settled in Plymouth, Massachusetts in 1620. For Bradford, as well as for the other members of this community, the decision to settle at Plymouth was the last step in a long march of exile from England, and the hardships they suffered in the new land were tempered with the knowledge that they were in place they had chosen for themselves, safe at last from persecution. Shortly after their arrival, Bradford was elected governor. His duties involved more than that title might imply today. He was chief judge and jury, oversaw agriculture and trade, and made allotments of land. It would be hard to imagine a historian better prepared to write the history of this colony. Bradford's own life provides a model of the life of the community as a whole. He was born in Yorkshire, in the town of Austerfield, of parents who were modestly well off. Bradford's father died when he was an infant. His mother remarried in 1593, and he was brought up by his paternal grandparents and uncles. He did not receive a university education. Instead, he was taught the art of farming. When he was only 12 or 13, he heard the sermons of the nonconformist minister Richard Clifton, who preached in a neighboring parish. These sermons changed Bradford's life, for Clifton was the religious guide of a small community of believers who met at the house of William Brewster in Scrooby, Nottinghamshire, and it was this group that Bradford joined in 1606. Much against the opposition of uncles and grandparents, he left home and joined them. They were unknown as separatists, because unlike the majority of Puritans, they saw no hope of reforming the Church of England from within. They wished to follow Calvin's model and to set up particular churches, each one founded on a formal covenant, entered into by those who professed their faith and swore to the covenant. Their model was the Old Testament covenant God made with Adam and renewed through Christ. In their covenanted churches, God offered himself as a contractual partner to each believer. It was a contract freely initiated but perpetually binding. They were not sympathetic to the idea of a national church. Separating was, however, by English law, an act of treason, and many believers paid a land forced on them. The Scrooby community took up residence in the Netherlands. Bradford joined them in 1609 and there learned to be a weaver. When he came into his inheritance, he went into business for himself. living in a foreign land was not easy, and eventually the scurvy community patiented for a grain of land in the New World. Their original grant was for land in the Virginia Territory, but high seas prevented them from reaching those shores, and they settled instead at Plymouth, Massachusetts. In the second book of Bradford's history, he describes the signing of the Mayflower Compact, a civil covenant designed to allow the temporal state to serve the godly citizen. It was the first of a number of plantation covenants designed to protect the rights of citizens beyond the reach of established governments. Bradford was a self-educated man, deeply committed to the Puritan cause. Cotton Mather, in his Ecclesiastical History of New England, describes him as a person for study, as well as action, and hence, notwithstanding the difficulties which he passed in his youth, he attended unto a notable skill in languages, but the Hebrew that he most of all studied, because he said he would see with his own eyes the ancient oracles of God in their native beauty. The crown of all his life was his holy, prayerful, watchful, and fruitful walk with God, wherein he was exemplary. Bradford served as governor for all but 5 of the remaining years of his life. The manuscript of Bradford's history, although known to early historians, disappeared from Boston after the Revolution. The first book, through the chapters 10, had been copied into the Plymouth Church records and was thus preserved, but the second book was presumed lost. The manuscript was eventually found in the residence of the Bishop of London and published for the first time in 1856. In 1897, it was returned to this country by ecclesiastical decree and was deposited in the State House in Boston. Chapter 10 of their voyage, and now they passed the sea, and of their safe arrival at Cape Cod. September 6. These troubles being blown over, and now all being compact together in one ship, they put to sea again with a prosperous wind, which continued divers days together, which was some encouragement unto them. Yet, according to the usual manner, many were afflicted with seasickness, and I may not omit here a special work of God's providence. There was a proud and very profane young man, one of the seamen, of a lusty, able body, which made him the more haughty. He would always be contempting the poor people in their sickness, and cursing them daily with grievous execrations, and did not like to tell them that he hoped to help to cast half of them overboard before they came to their journey's end. and to make merry with what they had. And if he were by any gently reproved, he would curse and swear most bitterly. But it pleased God, before they came half seas over, to smite this young man with a grievous disease, of which he died in a desperate manner, and so was himself the first that was thrown overboard. Thus his curses lighted on his own head, and it was an astonishment to all his fellows, for they noted it to be the just hand of God upon him. After they had enjoyed fair winds and weather for a season, they were encountered many times with cross winds and met with many fierce storms, with which the ship was sorely shaken, and her upper works made very leaky. And one of the main beams in the midships was bowed and cracked, which put them in some fear that the ship could not be able to perform the voyage. So some of the chief of the company, perceiving the mariners to fear the sufficiency of the ship, as appeared by their mutterings, they entered into serious consultation with the master and other officers of the ship, to consider in time of the danger, and rather to return than to cast themselves into a desperate and inevitable peril. And truly there was a great distraction and difference of opinion amongst the mariners themselves. Then would they do what could be done for their wages' sake, being now half the seas over, and on the other hand they were loath to hazard their lives too desperately. But in examining of all opinions, the master and others affirmed they knew the ship to be strong and firm under water. And as for the buckling of the main beam, there was a great iron skewer the passengers brought out of Holland, which would rest the beam into his place, the which being done, the carpenter and master affirmed that, with a post put under it, set firm in the lower deck, and other ways bound, he would make it sufficient. And as for the decks and upper works, they would caulk them as well as they could, and though with the working of the ship they would not long keep staunch, yet there would otherwise be no great danger, if they did not overpress her with sails. So they committed themselves to the will of God, and resolved to proceed. In sundry of these storms the winds were so fierce, and the seas so high, as they could not bear a knot of sail, but were forced to haul for divers days together. And in one of them, as they thus lay at home in a mighty storm, a lusty young man called John Holland, coming upon some occasion above the gratings, was with the sail of the ship thrown into the sea. But it pleased God that he caught hold of the topsail halyards, which hung overboard, and ran out at length. Yet he held his hold, though he was sundry fathoms under water, till he was hauled up by the same rope to the brim of the water. Till he was hauled up by the same rope to the brim of the water, and then with a boat, hook, and other means got into the ship again, and his life saved. And though he was something ill with it, yet he lived many years after, and became a profitable member both in church and commonwealth. In all this voyage there died but one of the passengers, which was William Button, a youth servant to Samuel Fuller, when they drew near the coast. But to omit other things, that I may be brief, after long beating at sea, they fell with that land, which is called Cape Cod, the which being made, and certainly known to be it, they were not a little joyful. After some deliberation had amongst themselves, and were not, and with the master of the ship, they talked about and resolved to stand from the southward, the wind and weather being fair, to find some place about Hudson's River for their habitation. But after they had sailed that course about half the day, they fell amongst dangerous shoals and rowing breakers, and they were so far entangled therewith as they conceived themselves in great danger, and the wind shrinking upon them withal, they resolved to bear up again for the Cape, and thought themselves happy to get out of those dangers before night overtook them, as by God's providence they did, and the next day they got into the Cape Harbor, where they read in safety. A word or two by the way of this Cape. It was thus first named by Captain Gosnold and his company anno 1602, and after by Captain Smith was called Cape James, but it retains the former name amongst seamen, although that point which first showed those dangerous shoals unto them, they called Point Care and Talker's Terror, but the French and Dutch to this day call it Malabar, by reason of those perilous shoals and the losses they have suffered there. Being thus arrived in a good harbor, and brought safe to land, they fell upon their knees, and blessed the God of heaven, who had brought them over the vast and furious ocean, and delivered them from all the perils and miseries thereof, again to set their feet on the firm and stable earth, their proper element, and no marvel if they were thus joyful, seeing wise Seneca was so affected with sailing a few miles on the coast of his own Italy, as he affirmed, that he had rather remain 20 years on his way by land than pass by sea to any place in a short time. So tedious and dreadful was the same unto him. But here I cannot but stay and make a pause, and stand half amazed at these poor people's present condition. And so I think will the reader too, when he will consider the same, being thus past the vast ocean, and the sea of troubles before in their preparation, as may be remembered by that which went before. They had now no friends to welcome them, nor inns to entertain or refresh their weather-beaten bodies, no houses or much less towns to repair to seek for succor. It is recorded in Scripture as a mercy to the apostle and his shipwrecked company, that the barbarians showed them no small kindness in refreshing them. But these savage barbarians, when they met with them, as after will appear, were readier to fill their sides full of arrows than otherwise. And for the season it was winter, and they that know the winters of that country know them to be sharp and violent, and subject to cruel and fierce storms, dangerous to travel to known places, much more to search an unknown coast. Besides, what can they see but a hideous and desolate wilderness, full of wild beasts and wild men? And what multitudes there might be of them, they knew not, neither could they, as it were, go up to the top of Pisgah, to view from this wilderness a more goodly country, to feed their hopes. For which way soever they turned their eyes, save upward to the heavens, they could have little solace or content in respect of any outward objects. For summer being done, all things stand upon them with a weather-beaten face, and the whole country, full of woods and thickets, represented a wild and savage hue. If they looked behind them, there was the mighty ocean which they had passed, and was now as a man bar and gulf to separate them from all the civil parts of the world. If it be said they had a ship to succor them, it is true, but what heard they daily from the master and company, but that with speed they should look out a place with their shot-lock, where they would be at some near distance, for the season was such as he would not stir from thence till a safe harbour was discovered. A safe harbour was discovered by them, where they would be, and he might go without danger, and that victuals consumed apace, but he must and would keep sufficient for themselves and their return. Yeah, it was muttered by some that if they got not a place in time, they would turn them and their goods ashore and leave them. Let it also be considered what weak hopes of supply and succor they left behind them, that might bear up their minds in this sad condition and trials they were under, and they could not but be very small. It is true, indeed, the affections and love of their brethren at Lydon was cordial and entire towards them, but they had little power to help them or themselves, and how the cat stood between them and the merchants at their coming away has already been declared. What can now sustain them but the Spirit of God and His grace? May not and ought not the children of these fathers rightly say, our fathers were Englishmen which came over this great ocean, and were ready to perish in this wilderness. But they cried unto the Lord, and he heard their voice, and looked on their adversity. Let them therefore praise the Lord, because he is good, and his mercies endure forever. Yea, let them which have been redeemed of the Lord show how he has delivered them from the hand of the oppressor, when they wandered in the desert wilderness, out of the way, and found no city to dwell in, both hungry and thirsty, their soul was overwhelmed in them. Let them confess before the Lord his loving kindness, and his wonderful works before the sons of men. Chapter 10, showing how they sought out a place of habitation, and what befell them thereabout. Being thus arrived at Cape Cod, the 11th of November, and necessity calling them to look out a place for habitation, as well as the masters and mariners' importunity, they having brought a large shallop with them out of England, stowed in quarters in the ship, they now got her out and set their carpenters to work to trim her up. But being much bruised and shattered in the ship with full weather, they saw she would be long in mending, whereupon a few of them tendered themselves to go by land and discover those nearest places, whilst the shallop was in mending, and the rather because as they went into that harbour, there seemed to be an opening some 2 or 3 leagues off, which the master judged to be a river. It was conceived there might be some danger in the attempt. Yet seeing them resolute, they were permitted to go, being 16 of them, were well armed under the conduct of Captain Standish, having such instructions given them as was thought meet. They set forth the 15th of November, and when they had marched about the space of a mile by the seaside, they espied 5 or 6 persons with a dog coming towards them, who were savages, but they fled from them and ran up into the woods, and the English followed them, partly to see if they could speak with them, and partly to discover if there might not be more of them lying in ambush. But the Indians, seeing themselves thus followed, they again forsook the woods, and ran away on the sands as hard as they could, so as they could not come near them, but followed them by the track of their feet sundry miles, and so that they had come the same way. So, night coming on, they met their rendezvous, and set out their sentinels, and rested in quiet that night. And the next morning followed their track till they had headed a great creek, and so left the sands, and turned another way into the woods. But they still followed them by guess, hoping to find their dwellings, but they soon lost both them and themselves, falling into such thickets as were ready to tear their clothes and armor in pieces, but were most distressed for want of drink. But at length they found water and refreshed themselves, being the first New England water they drank of, and was now in their great thirst as pleasant unto them as wine or beer had been in former times. Afterwards they directed their course to come to the other shore, for they knew it was a neck of land they were to cross over, and so at length got to the seaside, and marched to this supposed river, and by the way found a pound of clear fresh water, and shortly after a good quantity of clear ground where the Indians had formerly set corn, and some of their grapes, and proceeding further they saw new stubble where corn had been set the same year. Also they found where latterly a house had been, where some planks and a great kettle was remaining, and heaps of sand newly paddled with their hands, which they, digging up, found in them divers fair Indian baskets filled with corn, and some in ears, fair and good, of divers colors, which seemed to them a very goodly sight, having never seen any such before. This was near the place of that supposed river they came to seek, unto which they went and found it to open itself into two arms, with a high cliff of sand in the entrance, but more like to be creeks of salt water than any fresh, for aught they saw, and that there was good harbourage for their shallop, leaving it further to be discovered by their shallop when she was ready. So their time limited, them being expired, they returned to the ship, lest they should be in fear of their safety, and took with them part of the corn, and buried up the rest, and so like the men from Ashko carried with them of the fruits of the land, and showed their brethren, of which, and their return, they were marvelously glad, and their hearts encouraged. After this, the shallop being got ready, they set out again for the better discovery of this place. And the master of the ship desired to go himself. So there went some 30 men, but found it to be no harbour for ships, but only for boats. There was also found 2 of their houses covered with mats, and sundry of their implements in them. But the people were run away and could not be seen. Also there was found more of their corn, and of their beans of various colors. The corn and beans they brought away, purposing to give them full satisfaction when they should meet with any of them. As about some 6 months afterward they did, to their good content. And here is to be noted a special providence of God, and a great mercy to these poor people, that here they got seed to plant them corn the next year, or else they might have starved, for they had none, nor any likelihood they get any till the season had been past, as the sequel did manifest. Neither it is likely they had had these, if the first voyage had not been made, for the ground was now all covered with snow, and hard frozen. But the Lord is never wanting unto his in their greatest needs. Let his holy name have all the praise. The month of November being spent in these affairs, and much foul weather falling in, the 6th of December, they sent out their shallop again with 10 of their principal men, and some seamen, upon further discovery, intending to circulate that deep bay of Cape Cod. The weather was very cold, and it froze so hard as the spray of the sea lighting on their cots. They were as if they had been glazed, yet that night betimes they got down into the bottom of the bay, and as they drew near the shore, they saw some 10 or 12 Indians very busy about something. They landed about a league or two from them, and had much ado to put ashore anywhere. It lay so full of flats, being landed, it grew late, and they made themselves a barricade with logs and bars as well as they could in the time, and set out their sentinel and betook them to rest. And so the smoke of the fire the savages made that night. When morning was come, they divided their company, some to coast along the shore in a boat, and the rest marched through the woods to see the land, if any fit place might be for their dwelling. They came also to the place where they saw the Indians in the night before, and found they had been cutting up a great fish, like a grampus, being some 2 inches thick and flat like a hog, some pieces whereof they had left by the way. And the shallop found 2 more of these fishes dead on the sands, a thing usual after storms in that place, by reason of the great flats of sand that lie off. So they ran up and down all that day, but found no people, nor any place they liked. When the sun grew low, they hasted out of the woods to meet with their shallop, to when they made signs to come to them into a creek hard by, to which they did at high water, of which they were very glad, for they had not seen each other all that day, since the morning. So they made them a barricado, as usually they did every night, with logs, stakes, and thick pine boughs, the height of a man, leaving it open to leeward, probably to shelter them from the cold and wind, making their fire in the middle, and lying round about it, and partly to defend them from any sudden assaults of the savages, if they should surround them. So, being very weary, they betook them to rest, But about midnight they heard a hideous and great cry, and their sentinel called, "Arm! Arm!" So they bestirred them and stood to their arms, and shot off a couple of muskets, and then the noise ceased. They concluded it was a company of wolves, or such like wild beasts, for one of the seamen told them he had often heard such a noise in Newfoundland. So they rested till about 5 o'clock in the morning for the tide, and their purpose to go from thence made them bestirring betimes. So after prayer they prepared for breakfast, and it being day dawning, it was thought best to be carrying things down to the boat, but some said it was not best to carry the arms down. Others said they would be the readier, for they had lapped them up in their coats from the dew. But some 3 or 4 would not carry theirs till they went themselves. Yet as it fell out, the water being not high enough, they laid them down on the bankside, and came up to breakfast. But presently, all on a sudden, they heard a great and strange cry, which they knew to be the same voices they heard in the night, though they varied their notes, and one of their company, being abroad, came running in, and cried, "Men, Indians, Indians!" And withal their arrows came flying amongst them. Their men ran with all speed to recover their arms, as by the good providence of God they did. In the meantime, of those that were there ready, 2 muskets were discharged at them, and 2 more stood ready in the entrance of their rendezvous, but were commanded not to shoot till they could take full aim at them. And the other 2 charged again with all speed, for there were only 4 had arms there, and defended the barricado which was first assaulted. The cry of the Indians were dreadful, especially when they saw their men run out of the rendezvous toward the shallop to recover their arms, the Indians rolling about upon them, but some running out with coats of mail on, and cutlasses in their hands. They soon got their arms, and let fly amongst them, and quickly stopped their violence. Yet there was a lusty man, and no less valiant, stood behind a tree within half a musket shot, and let his arrows fly at them. Fly at them. He was seen to shoot 3 arrows, which were all avoided. He stood 3 shots of a musket, till one taking full aim at him, made the bark of splinters of the tree fly about a quarter of a mile. and shot it once or twice, and shot off 2 or 3 pieces, and some returned. This they did, that they might conceive that they were not afraid of them, or any way discouraged. Thus it pleased God to vanquish their enemies, and give them deliverance, and by his special providence so to dispose that not any one of them were either hurt or hit, though their arrows came close by them. And on every side them, and sundry of their cots, which hung up in the barricado, were shot through and through. Afterwards they gave God solemn thanks and praise for their deliverance, and gathered up a bundle of their arrows, and sent them into England, afterward by the master of the ship, and called the place the first encounter. From hence they departed, and coasted all along, but discerned no place likely for harbour, and therefore hasted to a place that their pilot, one Mr. Copping, who had been in the country before, did assure them was a good harbour, which he had been in, and they might fetch it before night, of which they were glad, for it began to be full weather. After some hours sailing, it began to snow and rain, and about the middle of the afternoon the wind increased, and the sea became very rough. And they broke their rudder, and it was as much as 2 men could do to steer her with the couple of oars. But their pilot bade them be of good cheer, for he saw the harbour, but the storm increasing, and night drawing on. They bore what sail they could to get in, while they could see, but herewith they broke their mast in 3 pieces, and their sail fell overboard in a very grand sea, so as they had like to have been cast away. Yet, by God's mercy, they recovered themselves, and having the flood with them, struck into the harbour. But when it came to, the pilot was deceived in the place, and said, The Lord be merciful unto them, for his eyes never saw that place before. And he and the master's mate would have run her ashore in a cove full of breakers before the wind. But a lusty seaman which steered bade those which rowed, if they were men, about with her, or else they were all cast away. The which they did with speed. So he bid them be of good cheer, and row lustily. For there was a fair sound before them. And he doubted not but they should find one place or other where they might ride in safety. And though it was very dark and rained sore, yet in the end they got under the lee of a small island, and remained there all that night in safety. But they knew not this to be an island till morning, but were divided in their minds. Some would keep the boat for fear they might be amongst the Indians. Others were so weak and cold they could not endure, but got ashore, and with much ado got fire, all things being so wet, and the rest were glad to come to them. For after midnight the wind shifted to the northwest, and it froze hard. But though this had been a day and night of much trouble and danger unto them, yet God gave them a morning of comfort and refreshing, as usually he does to his children. For the next day was a fair sunshiny day, and they found themselves to be on an island secure from the Indians, where they might dry their stuff, fix their pieces, and rest themselves, and gave God thanks for his mercies in their manifold deliverances. And this being the last day of the week, they prepared there to keep the Sabbath. On Monday they sounded the harbor, and found feet for shipping, and marched into the land, and found divers cornfields, and little running brooks, a place as they supposed fit for a situation. At least it made them glad to accept of it. So they returned to their ship again with this news to the rest of their people, which did much comfort their hearts. On the fifth of December, they weighed anchor to go to the place they had discovered, and came within 2 leagues of it, but were fain to bear up again. But the 16th day the wind came fair, and they arrived safe in this harbor, and afterwards took better view of the place, and resolved where to pitch their dwelling. And the 25th day began to erect the first house for common use, to receive them and their goods. From Book 2, from chapter 10, the remainder of Anno 1620. I shall later return back and begin with the combination made by them before they came ashore, being the first foundation of their government in this place, occasioned partly by the discontented and mutinous speeches that some of the strangers amongst them had let fall from them in the ship, that when they came ashore they would use their own liberty, for none had power to command them. The patent they had been for Virginia, and not for New England, which belonged to another government, with which the Virginia company had nothing to do, and partly that such an act by them done, this their condition considered, might be as firm as any patent, and in some respects more sure. The form was as follows: In the name of God, Amen. We whose names are underwritten, the loyal subjects of our dread sovereign Lord, King James, by the grace of God, of Great Britain, France, and Ireland King, defender of the faith, etc., having undertaken for the glory of God and advancement of the Christian faith, and honor of our King and country, a voyage to plant the first colony in the northern parts of Virginia. Do by these presents solemnly and mutually in the presence of God and one of another, covenant and combine ourselves together into a civil body politic, for our better ordering and preservation and furtherance of the ends aforesaid, and by virtue hereof to enact, constitute, and frame such just and equal laws, ordinances, acts, constitutions, and offices, from time to time, as shall be thought most meet and convenient for the general good of the colony, unto which we promise all due submission and obedience, in witness whereof we have hereunder subscribed our names at Cape Cod, the 11th of November, in the year of the reign of our sovereign Lord, King James of England, France, and Ireland the 18th, and of Scotland the 4th Anno Domini 1620. After these late shows, or rather confirmed, Mr. John Carver, a man godly and well approved amongst them, the governor for that year, and after they had provided a place for their goods, or common store, which were long in unlading for want of boats, footness of the winter weather, and sickness of divers, and begun some small cottages for their habitation, as time would admit. They made and consulted of laws and orders, both for their civil and military government, as the necessity of their condition did require, still adding thereunto as urgent occasion in several times, and as cases did require. Difficult beginnings. In these hard and difficult beginnings, they found some discontents, and murmurings arise amongst some, and mutinous speeches and carriages in other, but they were soon quelled and overcome by the wisdom, patience, and just and equal carriage of things by the governor and better part, which clave faithfully together in the men. But that which was most sad and lamentable was, that in 2 or 3 months' time half of their company died, especially in January and February, being the depth of water, and wanting houses and other comforts, being infected with the scurvy and other diseases, which this long voyage and their inaccommodable condition had brought upon them, so as there died sometimes 2 or thereof a day in the foresaid time, that of 100 and odd persons, scarce 50 remained, and of these in the time of most distress, there was but 6 or 7 sound persons, who to their great commendations, be it spoken, spared no pains, night nor day, but with abundance of toil and hazard of their own health, fetched them wood, made them fires, dressed them meat, made their beds, washed their loathsome clothes, clothed and unclothed them. In a word, did all the homely and necessary offices for them which dainty and queasy stomachs cannot endure to hear named, and all is willing and cheerfully, without any grudging in the least, showing herein their true love unto their friends and brethren, a rare example and worthy to be remembered. 2 of these 7 were Mr. William Brewster, their reverend elder, and Marla Standish, their captain and military commander, unto whom myself and many others were much beholden in our low and sick condition. And yet the Lord so upheld these persons, as in this general calamity they were not at all infected, either with sickness or lameness. And what I have said of these, I may say of many others who died in this general visitation, and others yet living, that whilst they had health, yet or any strength continuing, they were not wanting to any that had need of them, and I doubt not but their recompense is with the Lord. But I may not here pass by another remarkable passage, not to be forgotten, as this calamity fell among the passengers that were to be left here to plant, and were hasted ashore and made to drink water, that the seaman might have the more beer, and one in his sickness, desiring but a small can of beer. It was answered that if he were their own father, he should have none. The disease began to fall amongst them also, so as amongst half of their company died before they went away, and many of their officers and latest men, as the boats went, gunner, 3 quartermasters, the cook, and others, at which the master was something stricken, and sent to the sick ashore, and told the governor he should send for beer for them that had need of it, though he drank water homeward bound. But now amongst his company there was far another kind of courage in this misery than amongst the passengers, for they that before had been boon companions in drinking and jollity in the time of their health and welfare, began now to desert one another in this calamity, coming to help them in their cabins, and so, after they came to die by it, would do little or nothing for them, but if they died, let them die. But such of the passengers as were yet aboard showed them what mercy they could, which made some of their hearts relent, as the boats went, and some others, who was a proud young man, and would often curse and scoff at the passengers. But when he grew weak, they had compassion on him and helped him. Then he confessed he did not deserve it at their hands. He had abused them in word and deed. Oh, said he, you, I now see, show your love like Christians indeed one to another. But we let one another lie and die like dogs. Another lay cursing his wife, saying if it had not been for her, he had never come this unlucky voyage. And anon cursing his fellows, saying he had done this and that. For some of them he had spent so much, and so much. Among this and that, for some of them he had spent so much among them, and they were now weary of him, and did not help him, having need. Another gave his companion all he had, if he died, to help him in his weakness, He went and got a little spice and made him a mess of meat, once or twice, and because he died not so soon as he expected, he went amongst his fellows, and swore the rogue would cozen him. He would see him choked before he met him any more meat, and yet the poor fellow died before morning.